Hey everybody, I'm very excited, if not just mildly amused, to be bringing you this tutorial on how I create this 3D card graphic using Blender. There's definitely some other tutorials out there on how to get this effect, and they probably do it better or more efficiently, but I figured why send you over to those when I could just make my own tutorial and keep all of your attention for myself. Granted, there are a couple things that I'll be doing as far as the actual functions of Blender, like modeling and rendering and all this to set up the scene. I'll have screencast keys on so you can see exactly what I'm doing, but if you're unfamiliar with Blender, it would be good for you to watch a couple other tutorials on how to do general modeling and lighting and all that stuff. I'll have a couple tutorials that I used when I was first starting to learn Blender. That'll be in the description of this video, so go check those out if you're super new to Blender and want to learn how to use this really cool free software. So this is what this scene kind of looks like. You can actually see the graphic over there at the bottom right corner of the screen. I used a chroma key to have it spinning there. This is kind of what it looks like when you have the whole scene set up in Blender before you render things. But we're going to start from scratch so you can kind of see exactly what I do with setting up one of these cards, and you'll be able to follow along. If you're an intermediate in Blender, this should not be a very difficult thing to do at all. It might be a little wonky as far as the methodology of why I do it, but you should get the same end result regardless of how contrived my instructions might be. So let's get into it. The first thing that we're going to need to do, and I have a little note here talking about all the different steps we'll go through. First thing, we're going to make the card text in Blender. So this isn't really the first thing you need to do, but it helps to have it kind of out of the way. And I used Photoshop for creating this text that you see on the card right there. I used Photoshop for that, but I actually used a different graphic. I don't know why this one's still there, but you don't really need to use Photoshop. It's expensive, and if you're using Blender, the appeal of that might be that it's free, where I figured we would use a free graphic design program. This is Pixlr. It's a free online graphic design tool, super nifty, and yeah, we're just gonna create our text and everything in here. So if you don't have Photoshop, you can still use this. We'll just use a 1280 by 720 layout. Of course, if you have Photoshop, you'll want to use that rather than this. I'm just showing everyone this program for the sake of anyone that might not have Photoshop or can't afford some nicer graphic design programs. If you're even on a laptop and you don't have a lot of storage space, you can just use this. Don't have to install anything. I'm sure all the wonderful graphic designers and web designers that found my TikTok are really enjoying watching me create this graphic in Pixlr. Make it big, I guess. Who cares if it's kept the dimensions? If you know anything about graphic design, this entire part of the tutorial is useless to you, and I hope you will be satisfied with skipping ahead the part where I talk about things you don't know about. Okay, we have this fun text that says "Frick your life, bing bong," and we're gonna put it on a business card. But we want some kind of variation between the cards, so we're going to go ahead and save this. We're going to get a white text, and this is what's going to go over the opposite side of the card where there's depth and graphics and everything. Give it no blur, full opacity, something like that. That's just my creative decision. That's what I think is going to be readable for this graphic that's going over this 3D scene. So now we're going to quick export that as well. Yeah, we have the graphic part that's going to go into Blender. How great. All right, now that we're back in Blender, we're going to go ahead and make a new scene. I have a 2D scene that I have like saved settings for, so I don't have to set things up immediately. Everything is generally how I want it to be right from the start, but if you just go to File, New, and then 2D animation, things will be pretty similar for you. If you're a novice that's trying to follow along, the most like frustrating thing about trying to start some kind of 2D setup is that you're going to be started in draw mode. And the way that you switch between modes is right up here. If you don't know anything about Blender and you're trying to do things, or you're trying to follow a tutorial and things just aren't working, the buttons aren't doing what they're supposed to do, 99% of the time, it's going to be because you were in the wrong mode. So if you're following a tutorial and you're following this one and you really don't know what's going on most of the time, make sure you pay attention to this mode drop down thing up there, because that will change a lot throughout this process. You want to be starting in object mode. I'm going to go ahead and set up my scene exactly how I want it. I want it to be 1080 by 1080, and I have it all set up. First thing we're going to do, hit Shift A to bring up the object add menu. Grab a plane, and I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis about 90 degrees. And just type in 90 down here. That's a really fun trick for when you don't feel like eyeballing everything. I'm going to scale it up a bit, and then we're going to scale on the Z axis down a bit until it roughly fits the dimensions we want. And in 3D space, it looks like this. So we have a fun little plane. We're going to go ahead and give this a material so that we can see it well. I'm going to go to our material menu over here on the side, and when we hit this surface thing, we're going to grab emission, just make it white. So now we can see it perfectly fine. Great, super cool. I'm going to edit this. Make sure you're in vertex mode. And by just grabbing all these vertex or hitting A to grab them all, we should be able to bevel them. So we have our card. Next thing we want to do, which is a pretty important step, is we're going to grab our card, hit Shift D to duplicate it, hit Y so we're just moving on the Y-axis, and just move it back a little bit. If you zoom in, you can see this kind of line breaking them or showing where they're separated. We want there to be just a little bit of a difference from where they are. So we have this extra plane on the back here, marked in our menu up here as plane 001. So picking that plane, we're going to change the material on it. So we're going to get rid of this other material, which you can see it's still on this plane. The first one we made, it's now missing from this one. We're going to make a new material, and we're going to hit the surface thing and bring up holdout. So now what that's telling this material to do is whenever it's rendering a video or an image, it's going to make that transparent. So its alpha channel is going to be 0, so you can see behind it. You can superimpose that over other video, and you can see what's going on behind our initial render. One thing you might notice is it kind of just looks gray. In Blender, when things are transparent, they have a checkered pattern. So to get that, we have to go over to our render properties, hit film, and turn on transparent. So now you see our entire world space transparent, and when we look at the back of this card, it has that checkered pattern. Of course, we don't want the entire thing to be transparent. We want there to be some color of a background behind our card. So what we'll do to achieve that, and I'm hitting numpad 0 to go back to the camera. I know it tells you that, but that's kind of important when you're setting up these scenes that are going to have a stagnant camera. I'm going to hit mesh, plane, rotate it on the x-axis again. Doesn't have to be exact. Bring it back a ton, and then scale it until it fills up pretty much the whole screen. And now we're going to give that a material. I guess for visibility purposes, we'll make a different material. We can still make it an emission material, but we'll give it a different color. So why don't we do really nice, not so saturated pink, something like that. So now we have our card set up in 3D space so that when you look at the back of it, it is transparent. But we want things to move kind of together. We want this card to move at the same time as the one on the front. So I'm going to use this select tool and shift click both of them, grabbing the transparent one first. And I'm going to right click parent object. So now when we move this front card, you see that the transparent one moves with it. It's not like clipping through, it's moving perfectly at the same time. So now we have this card in 3D space. It's really fun and cool. What we have to do now is put our actual text on the card in a way that it moves with it and is superimposed over this card in 3D space. So if you haven't messed around with Blender a lot, there's probably an add-on that you don't have called Images as Planes. The way that you get it, you should go to Edit Preferences, and you're going to get this preference window. Under Add-ons, we'll search Images as Planes. You can see I already have it installed because it's checked, but you would just check that and hit, I think after checking it, it will be enabled. But if you haven't used Blender a lot and you haven't imported any images into a scene, then you need to make sure this is enabled for the sake of bringing in graphics easily. There is a way to make text in Blender, but it's just really not intuitive, and it's good for Blender's purposes, but it's difficult to manage when you're trying to do like a design that's symmetrical and simple enough that it's readable. So we're just gonna go ahead while we're in object mode, bring in images as planes, and it'll bring up this menu. I'm gonna go ahead and go to where we saved our graphic, and here we have it, Frick Your Life Bing Bong. I'm gonna scale it up roughly so that it fits. It's actually clipping a little bit, which means it's immediately on top of the card. So we're going to grab it and just bring it off a little bit until it's not doing that anymore. So now we have the text of our beautiful card. Now what we're going to do with this plane still selected, we're going to shift select the card here again, the plane behind it, and parent it. So now we'll rotate, wrong one. We'll rotate it and it moves with the card. Now, of course, we need the other text to go on the back side of this card. So we'll add another images planes. We're going to grab the white one, which if I pull back a bit, you can see is right there. Oh, one thing I forgot to do, very important with things like this. I'm going to undo what I just did. When you're adding an images plane with something like this, where you're using like toon shading, or you don't want it to be interacting with the light in the scene, which I don't, when you're adding this image here, you're going to want to select shadeless, because that is going to basically make it where your graphic is always going to look the same regardless of the lighting you have set up around it. With emission materials, it's possible for those to kind of act like a light sometimes, and if you don't turn on shadeless with this graphic bringing in, it could obscure the text a bit so that it doesn't look as great. So brought it in, it's shadeless now. You can see it's totally white. We're gonna scale it up. Doesn't really matter exactly the size, but we're gonna parent it to this backside. I think, yeah, it's roughly on top of the card, so that's fine. Now we need to add that other one that I forgot to do first. And you can see shadeless is on, I'm bringing it in, scale it up a bit. That's roughly where this one is. Yeah, you can see the box doesn't change a lot as I cycle through them. It's a very minor change, so it won't be too noticeable. And we want to bring this up just a little bit. So it doesn't clip through the card, but it's roughly right on top of it. We're going to parent it. You can also hit Control P. When we grab this white plane here, everything moves with it. So you can spin the card around. You can see everything is just one object. We have this card, and what we're going to want to do is basically set up a collection here. So we're going to not grab the camera, but we're going to shift select pretty much everything. You might want to turn on this transparency thing that lets you... Blender crashed. That's fine. You know what? It's okay that Blender crashed, even though I didn't save anything that I just did, because Blender is really, really swell at recovering sessions. Okay, this is the wrong one. Whenever it recovers the last session, it's looking for one that you actually saved. If you didn't save, you just need to go under File, Recover, Autosave, and you're just going to look for whichever is like the most recent one. I think it's this one. Okay, it's not this one. It's not this one. Okay, I think it did not autosave, actually. Which is upsetting. I'm actually quite upset if that's the circumstance that I'm in now. Yeah, okay, this autosaved from like the moment I started the project, so I guess I'm gonna do it again, I guess. Usually Blender is so much better at autosaving things, but okay, I'll just make it again. Doesn't matter. This is the easy part. I'll be right back when I have the card set up again. Okay, I've made the card again. Not too much time has passed. I'm not too upset about it. And I'm happy because it hasn't crashed this time, and you didn't see it because I just started recording. But what I did was I selected all of this stuff, made sure I had the back one selected too. Pretty much everything is grabbed here. So yeah, everything has been added to this new collection called Card, which I have right here. And a really quick way to add things to collections is selecting it, hitting M, and then you can hit new collection and then just type the name of it and send it off. And then it's in a collection, and that's going to make it really easy when we have a new scene with a bunch of new junk in it and we need to bring in this old thing that we made in a different project. We can just append that entire collection, it drops it in, it's great. With that being said, it's time to make the new scene where we're going to have all the 3D elements. So we're going to go ahead and save this one. I have it saved as card file. I'm going to make a new 2D animation scene. I'm going to go ahead and turn on the transparency under film settings, which you don't really need to. It just helps me see things when they're already set up as being transparent. And we're going to add a plane kind of just as the background. I'm actually really excited to make this project because I thought, I could just show you guys what my card looked like and how I had that scene set up, but I figured it'd be so much more fun to make an entirely new scene in 3D for you guys to gape and gawp at, just totally marvel at my creative abilities. So we're going to make a plane kind of here in the background to just be the backdrop. It's important with 3D scenes like this that you're not just covering up the y-axis background, because you're going to be seeing the x-axis as well on both sides. So what we're going to do is scale this out on the x-axis like that, and I'm going to go to edit mode, grab edge select, and just grab this edge over here and extend it on the y-axis out like this. So we're going to make a box, so even though this thing is going to be spinning around, we're going to be able to have some backgrounds kind of on the edges. So we're going to do that over here as well. So we have this little fun box that all our stuff is going to fit in. Even when this is rotating around, it'll kind of cover up the blank space in the background. So now we can start laying in other 3D elements now that we have this very fun white background. With the way that I set up my business card, I already kind of had everything modeled. I modeled it just over the course of a couple weeks, and there was a couple complicated things that I had to figure out that were frustrating at times. But I figured I would show you guys a different kind of scene. As some of you said, you were upset that I had this little green man, Bobby, trapped in my business card, and a lot of you wish that I would release him from the card. So I figured today we would trap a different character that is a little more fitting for the imprisonment life. So I've decided to capture this criminal and set up a card where he will live. But yeah, so I modeled this about 5 minutes before I started the video, I guess. I mean, it took more than 5 minutes, but we have this whole guy here. This is PP from the item label franchise. I don't know if you can call it a franchise. They're like a independent company, but I actually forgot to parent everything. I'm going to do that now. Now when I turn him, yeah, we have the whole guy. I don't have any armatures on him, so he's not going to be like spinning around or anything, but he is here, and he's going to be kind of our main focus of the card. So the way we want to set up this scene, just to keep it totally simple, I'm going to bring PP back a little bit. And I want to have some kind of movement of a parallax type in the background. So what I'll do is just make this circle. I want to rotate it the x-axis like this, about 90 degrees. It's really difficult to see, but that's a circle. I think if I give it a material, it should be apparent. I'm going to give it an emission. Okay, it's not. Can I give it a face? Okay, I gave it a face by hitting the F key in edit mode. So that's how we have this very nice color now. So I'm just going to go ahead and scale this down a bit, place it in the background, and move it back, kind of like that, so it's out of PP's way. I want to give this an array modifier, a couple array modifiers that are going to just duplicate it a bunch, kind of just to fill up all the space. It can kind of just go forever. Doesn't really matter. We'll duplicate that. Yeah, so that we have all of these circles spanning infinitely. Not actually infinitely. There's just a lot of them. So what I'm going to do with this fun little circle, I'm going to duplicate it, kind of bring it down about there. And I'm actually going to bring this one back even further, scale it up a bit. Not that much. and we're going to change the color of it. So we're going to create a new material for this one specifically, give it an emission, and we're going to pick a really nice, not too saturated blue, something like that. And then we'll duplicate this one again. On the z-axis, just bring it totally down like that. Let's give this one a nice yellow. How fun, how nice. Duplicate this one, the blue one again, bring it down. I might just want to do that pink again. So let's grab our pink like that. So we have this really fun little background for PP to enjoy in his days in prison. Actually, you know what? He's in jail. We don't need them. We don't need the bars. I've decided I don't like the prison bars. I need a light in the scene because he's not really. Is there just like a sun? There should be a shading effect on it. He should be like blue, the shadows. Is it because this is like white? Oh yeah, that's it. The world was a bit too bright for PP. We've got a little light in the scene now. I can bring up the power of it to illuminate PP a bit. Gives him some depth. It only looks a little terrifying. That's good. Okay, now there's a fun lighting effect going on with him. This plane in the background, I forgot to give it an emission material because I want it to be white. Perfectly white like that. Okay, so now we have this fun little 3D thing going on with PP. Now we can bring in the card collection from our other project by hitting File, Append, and we're just going to find that project right here, card file, append, and I'm going to look for collection and grab the one that says card. And that should just drop it right in the center, right where we left it. At this point, I think the best thing we can do is to grab PP's body, the main thing that's parented, and then just grab everything else back here by holding shift and selecting all of it. And then we're going to hit control or shift to select the main card as well. And then hit control P to parent it all to this object that is the card. So you'll see that when we move this card on the z-axis, everything else is moving with it, all moving in 3D space. So we want to animate this card so it spins around. And the way that we're going to do that is by selecting the main card, hitting an I for insert keyframe, then hit rotation. Okay, my screencast keys are broken again. Let me fix them. So now we're going to hit I with this main plane setup. Oh, I already did. I have a rotation keyframe, and I'm going to go to roughly 60, I'll say 59 frames, and I'm going to hit RZ. I'm going to rotate it around like this. I've made a huge mistake, actually. This is not how we want the scene parented and set up. So let me fix it. So I've undone the parenting. We're going to rotate that 180 degrees. And we're going to bring it back to roughly how we want it, where it's going to show up through the card. So now we have the scene set up so that when we're looking through the transparent part of the card, you can see PP back there through the card behind the text. That's going to be the effect that happens. So now that we have our scene set up roughly how we'll want to render it, what we're going to do now with all this stuff parented or selected, we're going to grab the main card, hit Control P, object. So now all of that stuff is parented to our main card. When we rotate it, it moves with it, which is very nice. So now it's just about animating this main card. Okay, now we have the scene set up, and we want to hit I on our main card on the 0th frame. So that's going to give us a rotation keyframe. So then at 59, I'm going to hit RZ, and I'm going to turn it about. I think the best thing to do is to turn it 181 degrees. Hit I to add a rotation keyframe. We'll see the whole thing turns around with it. And it does this easing thing. The way we're going to fix that is by selecting all of these keyframes, going to easing mode or interpolation mode, and setting it to linear. That way it's going to be a constant turning the entire time. It's not going to like slow down as it gets to the end. And now we're going to go ahead and insert another keyframe after turning this. Yeah, and now we have this fun little turning thing. And it just goes forever. It just never stops. At this point, we want to save our project as a couple different things. So we're going to hit Save As. And we're going to save this first one as render, like that. And I'm going to hit Control Shift S to save another one. And I'll save a project as card render. So with our two new projects, we're in scene render right now. What we want to do is grab all of this junk from the scene. That's including the card, or from the card scene. We're grabbing the stuff from the card scene right now. And what we're going to do is we're going to make it where that stuff does not show up in the render. So to do that, we go over to Object Properties, go to Visibility, and hit Renders. So I don't think that's going to affect everything immediately. You kind of want to select stuff one by one. Yeah, you can see these things are set up to show up in the render. We don't want that. So just make sure all of this stuff isn't going to show up in the render. All of those things, they're not going to show up in our render when we render this thing right now. So let's go ahead and set it up to render. I already have it pretty much on the settings I want. I just have to pick place. Going to, on this folder, I clicked that and it brought up this thing. Saving this as accept. I have my render settings as MPEG-4, H.264, high quality. That just generally works for me. If you want this to look really good on every single video platform everywhere, you might need to mess with it a lot past that point. But that's just what works for my small brain. So now you can see it's rendering, it's going through, you can see a lot of stuff is happening. And at this point, PP would be coming onto the screen on the card. I'm actually going to mess with this a little bit. Before we totally commit to that, I'm going to scale this up a bunch. We're going to hit render again. That way, there's not going to be any like blank space under PP as he's spinning around like that. So hopefully that looks decent. So now we have our initial render. We're going to save that over the card or the scene render. And we're going to go open up card render real quick. And what we're going to do now is just select all of this junk that was showing up in our scene render, and we're just going to delete it. We don't need it. It's old news. It doesn't need to be here. All right, so now what we've done, we've gone into this scene where we had everything before. We just deleted all of the stuff that was in our 3D scene, you know, with PP and the lights and the white backdrop. We deleted all of that, and now we're just left with the card. But it still has the animation that we had set up before. It's very important that the animation is the same. I guess you could make it a different, like, stagnant thing if you wanted. You can do whatever you want. But for the purposes of the effect that I got, you want the animation to be exactly the same. There's actually an empty here that I don't need. But yeah, so we have the card as it is, just in itself a graphic. To make sure that it actually renders as a transparent thing that we can superimpose, we're going to go over to our render settings. And we're going to change our container to QuickTime, and then our video codec to Huff YUV, I guess is how you would say that. It's important that it's set at that because that's one of the only video containers that Blender operates on that has transparency, where you can have a transparent alpha channel that you can drop over other video so that it shows up behind this one. Again, I'm not like an expert at Blender. There's definitely an easier way to get this effect. This is just what I did. I'm just showing you it. There's like video tutorials I followed that showed how to get this effect using like scenes and render layers, and I just couldn't get it to work right. So I kind of have this 3-step process, like render one thing, render another thing, and then put them on top of each other. Once you have QuickTime selected, you go up to Color RGBA. That's going to make it where when we render it, it's going to render an alpha channel that is transparent. So now I'm going to hit the folder thing again. You can see we have our scene render with PP in all of his shame of being imprisoned in a business card. And we're going to saving it as card render, hit accept. And because we have it pretty much set up, we can hit render animation now. And you can see it's rendering the card. It says Frick Your Life Bing Bong, spinning around, and then boom, transparency. You can see all the checkered patterns on it, where that's where our 3D scene is going to show up. It's going to show up behind the text, even though 3D space-wise, PP is like peeking out in front of it. So now we have that set up. I'm going to save this project for the card render, and I'm going to open the scene render because that has the rendering settings that we really want. So to put these two things we have rendered on top of each other now, so that it shows up in 3D space and it's really fun, we're going to hit this plus sign here to add a new window, and then go to video editing, hit video editing, bring this all the way to the first frame, and we're going to go into our folder with all of our fun files. And first you're going to bring in the scene render. So you can see we've dropped in the render that has all our 3D stuff. And then we're bringing in the card render. So now we have both of them here. But if you go to the transparent part, you see that it still is not showing PP behind. That's because you need to go over to the blend mode over here and hit alpha over right there. Now you can see PP shows up like that. He's behind the text. You can play it through. You see that PP is just in the card. He's trapped. He can't get out. But immediately there are things I don't like about this about this card that I would like to change. Mainly PP's placement in it. He's kind of just like too big. So I think we'll cut him down to size. I'm going to delete this because if you don't delete it and you try to render this thing again, it's going to only render the video editing part. It's not going to let you render this stuff again. So, okay, we have the render exactly how I want it. Going back over to video editing, going to the first frame, grabbing our files, bringing in scene render, then card render. Boom, got them both. Now it's time to change the compositing alpha over. Then we'll hit render animation with all of our stuff set up in video editing. It's going to go through super quick. Just drop everything right over it. Saved, close it. We can go over to our folder, see final card render, and here we have it. The card with 3D junk. Very nice. I hope you enjoyed watching me struggle through this tutorial. I usually don't do tutorials, but this was a very fun project, so I didn't mind doing it again. I'm very excited to see if you guys make some fun stuff with this card. I hope you will share it and get lots of business and do the business with your new business card that is 3D, that isn't real. So thank you for watching. If you'd like more Blender tutorials on things that I do, I have a lot of other Blender projects I've made. If those are interesting to you, or you feel that there's something unique about the way I do them that I stole from other people that you'd love to know how I did, then leave a comment. Let me know if there's a specific thing that you want me to talk about projects I make in Blender. I usually do 2D animated stuff, so they're not quite as complicated as this project as far as the actual process of putting them all together. But yeah, either way, it's fun to talk about and share. So I hope you will subscribe and stick around for the next project that I put out. I'm putting out a lot of stuff on TikTok right now, so if you're seeing this, you're probably over from TikTok. Yeah, check out my things if you feel like. Bing bong.